Hey guys, welcome back. So, there's a new entry in a pretty big video game franchise coming out this week. Thursday, in fact. Worldwide simultaneous release. It's Final Fantasy 16. And it kind of snuck up on me, but last week I wouldn't have known about it if I hadn't seen it in my recommends. One of the YouTubers I watch was doing a live stream of the demo, which they released last week, and you should check out. And now I am super psyched for this fucking game. I kind of like with Resident Evil 4, although I'd say even more so. I was avoiding all media related to it. Um, I didn't know what to expect. I just knew it was further along than Final Fantasy 15 was, which took like 10 years. Yeah, I know it started as Versus 13. I've made videos about that. I know the whole history, the whole process. Young Yeah had a video about how Square Enix is worried about the lack of pre-orders for Final Fantasy 16. To which I'm like, Square, you do realize that the last two launches of your mainline entry, Final Fantasy 14 and 15, launched pretty ugly, man. Like, 14 had to be scrapped and redone completely. 14 is great now, by the way, if you're looking for an MMO. I highly recommend it. 15, on the other hand, oh my god, it's so many bugs. I made a video not long after it came out, Final Fantasy 15, defending it because I thought it was getting uh, too much hate, and because it definitely launched more complete than or feeling more complete than Metal Gear Solid 5 and Street Fighter 5, and 15 at least gave you mostly the whole game. There were also some pretty bad bugs that they needed to fix right out of the gate. But it just hearing about Square Enix's, people kind of worried and panicking about the lack of pre-orders. It kind of makes me laugh because I'm just like, you guys are so used to living in the corporate mindset that you forget what it's like to be a customer, and only someone who has that disconnect would be panicking about the lack of pre-orders. Like, of course, Square. Like, look what happened with their last two games. It wasn't pretty. It also means that gamers are learning that pre-orders are generally not the best way to go, especially now in today's age. Pre-orders used to be there for when scarcity was a thing, when your local Best Buy or Toys R Us or whatever might run out of that really highly anticipated game. I used to see it a lot back in the 90s with especially the WWF WCW video games on the N64. Jesus, those would sell quick, and I mean with good reason. Those games were really really fun. But pre-ordering used to be just so that you could guarantee yourself that you would have a copy on that day because there was a good chance if it was highly anticipated, they would run out of copies on day one. So pre-ordering was there for that. Over time, well, you live in today's age. You know what's going on with pre-orders nowadays. There's just incentive. It's a way for companies to be able to, depending on how big they are, show their shareholders how marketable and just how lucrative games are. Because the gaming industry is huge. It's bigger than any other entertainment industry nowadays. It really is. And so pre-orders are just a great way to show shareholders, hey, look how many people want to buy our games. Please invest more money. And so they'll offer, these pre-order incentives, and it's an ugly, greedy process. It's not great to see, especially when you consider what pre-ordering used to be about. But regardless, I think it was a very smart idea to release a demo for Final Fantasy 16 because I have now played that demo, and I am super fucking psyched for 16, and with good reason. One of the first things I noticed immediately is that they don't seem to be afraid of getting an M rating anymore. Um, I feel like the refusal to go there really hurt Final Fantasy 15 because there were things that were left on the cutting room floor. I mean, a lot of early trailers for 15 showed a lot of dark shit, and a lot of us were really hyped for that. And we know that when it was versus 13, it was definitely going to be more mature in nature. There was going to be a little bit more violence. There was going to be blood, and with modern graphics looking the way they are, I mean, it was just going to be all over the place. Not only that, but the first demo we got of Final Fantasy 15 came packaged with the uh, physical release of Final Fantasy Type 0, which was rated M for mature. That was a PSP game. And I do recommend Type 0. Type 0 was awesome. But Type 0 wasn't afraid to go there. It was almost, it was inspired by, like, historic documentaries about, World War II and things like that. So there was some heavy shit, military, savagery, and just the cost of war. There was blood. There was all this. So a lot of us were hyped. And that Final Fantasy 15 demo, I made a video about it after playing it because I was so impressed, and it was fucking awesome. And I had high hopes, but the closer we got to 15, and when they released that second demo, and the combat had not completely, but heavily changed, I got a little worried because I still think the episode Duskai demo's gameplay was better than the ultimate gameplay we got in the full Final Fantasy 15 game. I really do. And the improvements they made later were cool and everything, but man, I was really excited to play that game, and it changed on me before we got there. I still ended up liking it, and it is a recommend now with the Royal Edition with all the content in there, but like they had to tear that apart just so they could avoid an M rating, and that was very disappointing. I mean, you got part of the story in the anime Brotherhood, and then another part of the story in the Kingsglaive movie. There's like one or two novels of 15, and it's like, why didn't you just? It should have all been put in the game. It should have all been in the game, and yeah, that would have been more expensive, and that's part of the reason why they did it. But I also feel like if you had just released the game and not tried so hard to maintain a T rating instead of just going full M, you wouldn't have had to cut so many corners. I really do think that T rating hurt that game because of the content they had to leave out, and it would have been a more interesting and engaging story. But and it also hurt, frankly, the Final Fantasy VII remake, I feel, because well, that video's coming. It's I'm going to, well, let me just say this. The Final Fantasy VII remake, if Final Fantasy VII were remade properly, without any sort of censorship whatsoever, it probably would earn itself an M rating, because there was a lot of shit going on in the original Final Fantasy VII, and Sephiroth was just leaving a fucking massacre everywhere he went, and blood was everywhere, that to adapt it faithfully to a remake would have to give you, especially with graphics looking the way they are, super realistic, it would have to get an M rating. They got away with it back then because, I mean, they were like terrible looking 3D, polygonal models, over 2D pre-rendered backgrounds. So it was easy to get away with more mature content that way. But to adapt it into today's gaming sphere, looking the way games look now, it would have to be an M rating. So right away, upon playing the Final Fantasy 16 demo and hearing like F-bombs and things like that, I mean, I don't want to give you the wrong impression. It's not excessive, but they drop F-bombs where it's appropriate. Okay, it's not like a character's like, Mom, I want some fucking breakfast, where it's just like completely unnecessary. No, it's in the middle of battle, shit's going down, and there's a character like, oh fuck, 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 and it sings like that. And there's also the way I put it to some of my friends I've told about the demo is like, there's some implied heavy petting. Okay, there's a there's definitely some things going on. It does remind me a little bit of, because it is going back to its like medieval fantasy type of atmosphere, which Final Fantasy goes back and forth with like sci-fi and medieval fantasy, but it does remind me a bit of like Game of Thrones, except not as nihilistic, and the magic is more there and not as implied, but it's definitely there because it is Final Fantasy. But the story is tragic. The demo is actually like two demos in one, really. It gives you a good chunk of the beginning of the game, and it even tells you right away when you start the demo that you'll be able to actually like continue where you left off in the demo when the full game comes out, which is also great. That's like Trials of Mana. Trials of Mana did that. Trials of Mana, by the way, one of the best remakes ever. That does deserve its own video, but I still have to make my Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Village, and Final Fantasy 7 remake videos first. Those are priority. But that one will probably get a video of its own one day. Anyway, once you get to the end of the main demo, you'll save your game. It'll tell you get to pick up where you left off later. That unlocks another demo, you could say, that takes place later in the game, with the main character Clive having way more of his shit that you'll be able to have, and it's not even necessarily reflective of what he'll have at that point in the game. But it's mainly there to give you a sense of what the combat's going to be like. And that's where it really shines, because that's the part you can play over and over again. That's also what you're watching right now. I didn't get a lot of the main demo footage because I didn't want to spoil it, because like I said, the story, man, I can't wait to keep going, because I'm very intrigued. It's in a way, it's very heartbreaking. It's like like when you read a good book and you get to a part and you're just like, man, that's fucked. What happens next? Like, and or watch a good show and it's like it's gonna be, there's meat on these bones. Okay, let me. Final Fantasy has always had great stories. And this one is certainly no fucking different, man. Like I want to see where it goes. The combat is one of the guys from Devil May Cry 5 who's working on it. If you like action games, if you like Devil May Cry 5, if you liked Nier Automata, and you just really like good action combat, this game is going to be action heavy. Now that's been a major point of criticism from a lot of diehard Final Fantasy fans. Even I am kind of like, man, I hope you know what you're doing. But even with the one big thing I really liked about the Final Fantasy VII remake was that the combat was good, but oh man, that's a whole nother. So every Final Fantasy game is different. That's true even for the originals, and the combat style is always tweaked and different from the last game, and that's one thing you need to understand about the series. So I'm okay with change from game to game, because that's how it's always been with Final Fantasy. That's why some people prefer Dragon Quest, because these are like the godfathers of the JRPG genre. One day I'll probably make a video about JRPGs, but those two been around forever, since the 80s and the NES, and they really pioneered the genre. And with Final Fantasy, it used to be every game was turn-based RPG. I mean, and we love it that way. I'd love it if Final Fantasy went back to turn-based RPG. I'm open to that, because that gameplay is the shit. I love it. But they also know that they need to try to attract newer gamers, and that I don't necessarily even subscribe to their reasoning for staying action focused with these later entries. I think they could successfully keep it turn based and still attract a new audience because they've done it before with the original Final Fantasy VII. Just saying. But as long as the game is good, I'll sing its praises. I'm not some guy who's so stuck in his ways that I'm gonna lie to you about whether a good game is good or not. I'm not gonna be so butthurt about the game not being turn-based that I'll lie to you and say that this game's gameplay sucks because as it stands right now, the gameplay is fucking awesome. I like it. But yeah, you get two parts of the demo. Beat the main demo, and it'll give you a demo with more combat, and it's awesome. And I welcome you guys to try it out and see for yourself, because yeah, pre-ordering is kind of sus nowadays. I don't blame you, but I am going to buy this game on day one, that's for sure. I'll probably go get a physical copy, though. And for some of you, it's the other thing you need to know is Final Fantasy is always different, including the world and the characters. So if you're thinking, Final Fantasy 16, I haven't even played 1 through 15. You don't need to. It's fine. However, there is value in playing all of them. And if you ever wanted to start Final Fantasy from the beginning, you actually could. That was a long intro I just gave you. But this video is actually about letting you also know that the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters have finally launched on consoles. And they did it, I want to say the end of April. And 1 through 6 are available on consoles. I played them last year on PC. I am going to play them all on console, and I'll probably make it an annual thing because I'm a big Final Fantasy fan, and all the games, even the controversial ones, mean something to me. And you can actually, if you've never played Final Fantasy, you've got the chance to start with the first 6, and the first 6 are some of the greats. Even 1 through 3, which were only on NES, they're not as long as the later games because of hardware limitations naturally, but it pays to see the groundwork being laid for the first time. And these Pixel Remasters too, they keep the games it almost as they were. They make it look prettier. They add some quality of life changes that make the game even more fun, I think. But they don't change the game much. They even have Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 3 even have their old magic stock system, which is different from just having MP that you can use. It was more traditional, even like tabletop RPG style, where every spell had a number of uses. I mean, it was a little more complicated than that, but it was a stock spell system. You'll get used to it. It pays to have seen where mechanics come from. I also urge you to start from the beginning and go in order. Play 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. Because it actually, I got some. I'd already played them all before, but I'd played them wildly out of order. Yeah, Final Fantasy 1 was my first Final Fantasy. I'll make a video about that someday because it's a rough ride, and I vowed never to play that game ever again. At least not the NES version. I've since played it, various remakes, including the anniversary PSP ones. But the original NES, fuck that game so much. But I've beaten the Pixel Remaster twice now, and the last time I beat it in just under 13 hours, and it pays. But something happened when I played them all in order. You get to see where the mechanics start off, where they originate, and then you see how they build on each other from game to game, and you get something out of it. It makes playing through the later entries even better, because you understand how the mechanics are supposed to work. because you played the previous game where certain mechanics were already introduced, and then you see how they're improved. Sometimes they're nerfed because they were OP, but there's something in it. You get something. I don't know how to describe it. It's special. Play them in order, and you won't regret it. You'll thank me even. I went from Final Fantasy V. I used to think was one of the worst, weakest entries in the series. Now it's one of my favorites. Now it's one of my all-time favorites because they refined the job system, introduced even as far back as the first one with sort of the proto job system, and then introduced really heavily into Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy V mastered it though, to the point where here's the frustrating thing about being an OG Final Fantasy fan is you Square apparently still wants to make games like OG Final Fantasy games, but they don't want to make the mainline entries. They're still making Bravely Default, which is essentially Final Fantasy V's, job system. Basically Final Fantasy V, and Triangle Strategy, which is basically Final Fantasy Tactics. It's Octopath Traveler, which is also basically like they're all turn-based, RPGs. So they still want to make them. They just don't want to spend a lot of money on them, and they don't want to attach the Final Fantasy name to them, and I don't get that. They've Final Fantasy VII alone on the PlayStation 1, that was a lot of people's first Final Fantasy game. That was a lot of people's first JRPG. The marketing was amazing back then. It was something else. It really was. But I mean, again, like I said, with Final Fantasy 16, if the gameplay is good, if it's awesome, if the story kicks ass, okay, like keep it up. Don't fuck up. But I feel like they would be able to crank out more games in the series if they just made the game that they thought it should be, I guess you could say. If they stopped worrying about whether or not the gameplay would be enjoyed by younger gamers. Just make the game it needs to be. That should be their philosophy at all times. But it's not. And it hasn't, to me, it hasn't resulted in a shit Final Fantasy game. There have been some that I had criticisms of, but I've never hated any particular entry. Even Final Fantasy 13, that one gets a lot of hate because it was very linear, and yeah, that was a problem for me. But the story and the characters, I cared about, and honestly, the gameplay I really liked in 13. It's just the game was very much a linear game, and I've heard defenders of 13 say, well, they're all kind of linear. It's like, well, to an extent, but you can control where you want to go. With 13, that was so reduced to run to this point in the map and then trigger more cutscenes that it lost it felt like it was lifeless. And the story definitely sent it there because you were playing as a bunch of characters that were kind of on the run. But still, you still want it to feel in some way like Final Fantasy. But for a lot of you, especially you younger guys, if Final Fantasy 16, if I've gotten you interested in Final Fantasy 16 and you check it out and you love it, and then you suddenly want to get into the old games, fucking do it. Jump in there. I might do like a retrospective on each of those 6 Pixel Remasters because they're all special, especially 6. Some of you that you think Final Fantasy 7 was the best of all time, no, 6. 6 is the GOAT. I'm telling you right now. I know it was because with every subsequent entry, I was like, if only it were more like 6. That's how I know it's the best. And even then, when you play them in order, you might even disagree because some of the things that were introduced in 5 were sort of nerfed in 6, and that was a drawback. But 6 as an overall package with its characters, with its story, man, it's groundbreaking. I work in retail, so I work with a lot of younger people that have never they don't know the joys of playing a single player game and just having it engross you and just consume everything, consume your time, and just they're used to playing, Fortnite and Valorant and just multiplayer games. And they didn't grow up with the kinds of games, that a lot of us grew up with. So they don't know the joys of a game with a really good story. And that's a shame. It's heartbreaking, really, when I think about it, because they have access to a lot of really good games. If they own a Switch, just with the Nintendo Switch Online membership, all the games you can play on their on their virtual consoles, you could say, they're there, and they just got to play them. And with the Pixel Remasters, on the console even added even more quality of life changes. You can actually like boost how much XP you earn from fights, so that the grind isn't as time consuming, which is always one of the bigger complaints of people that don't like turn-based RPGs. Now the grind, it doesn't have to be such a chore, and you can fucking like get your characters to the levels you want to. You can even turn off encounters like the random battles, which you don't want to do too much, because character progression is tied to that, and you want your characters to get stronger. But like, if you need to backtrack because like, oh shit, did I miss a chest or something, being able to turn off the enemy encounters for that is great. You know what I mean? And then as soon as you find that chest you missed, turn them back on. I mean, it's there. You basically, if you hadn't played the OG Final Fantasy games because you're just not a big fan of turn-based RPGs or random battle systems, you kind of have no excuse now. These are the most accessible, like, fun versions of these games that are available right now. Even better, because the music has been remastered, and Final Fantasy is known for some of the best fucking music in video game history, okay? Like, they have concerts in Japan where they play Final Fantasy music. Orchestras, full-on orchestras play Final Fantasy music. That's how good it is. Like, and I don't think there's been a single Final Fantasy game that didn't have fucking boss music, man. Like, they're all great. Final Fantasy 13, ironically, as controversial a game as that is, has bangers, like tracks that were just bangers, man. Like, and don't get me just started on Dissidia and a lot of the remixes, but like, this game, Final Fantasy 16 is no exception. It's already like, its music already kicks ass. Like, the music from the trailers kicks ass. Like, I'm ready. Yeah, it's now's the time. Now is the time to get into Final Fantasy if you always were curious about it and you're always kind of looking at it. Go ahead and play Final Fantasy 16 first. It's a modern game. Its combat's awesome. Its story is already badass. It's pulling me in. I'm super excited for it. But you're gonna, if you end up playing Final Fantasy 16 and you are curious about the rest of the series, I'm just letting you know, just putting it out there. You can start from the beginning now and have fun and really enjoy these games. There's something there, and you're experiencing part of history, because like I said, Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest are like the forefathers of the JRPG genre. And back then we didn't call them JRPGs, we just called them RPGs. A lot of the games, like, the Elder Scrolls and Ultima, those were PC only. So, and I've said this before, growing up in the 90s, it was mainly rich kids that had PCs, and the rest of us were a bunch of console scrubs. And the only RPGs we had access to were JRPGs, actually. And so we called them RPGs. It wasn't really until Fallout and Elder Scrolls came to consoles that strangely enough, we didn't call them Western RPGs, we just called them RPGs, and then we started referring to the old school RPGs we grew up with as JRPGs. to denote their Japanese origins. So yeah, back then they were just RPGs, and all I knew is those games were they always pulled me in. They had story. You could equip stuff on your characters to make them stronger, and you couldn't do that in like Mega Man or Castlevania. And I loved RPGs for that. You could stay at an inn and heal up all your health. There just weren't a lot of games like that back then. And Final Fantasy was, one of the forefathers of that. And right now, you have access to the first 6 games in that series. And yeah, now's the time. I can't emphasize that enough. Just check it out. It's a good time to get into the series, especially if 16 is going to be as awesome as I think it is. So yeah, stay tuned for that. I am working on a Resident Evil 4 video before finishing my Village video, because I have a lot to say about that. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, guys, I'll see you on the next one. Take care.